Okay. Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone is having a phenomenal day. And welcome to our April Town Hall. Today, we're going to be talking about anti-racism, and we have a phenomenal guest with us today, Dr. Tanya Tinsley. I'll talk a little bit about her as we move forward. You know, the purpose of these town halls is to really connect with our membership, to have an opportunity to talk with you all, to share with you all, to hear from you all, and to provide you some updates. Right now, we are 10 strong in the interstate compact issue. And so we are excited about that. And I am so excited that I'm even looking at how I'm going to get involved and get other states involved because I want to start practicing in other states. So before we move any further, I'd like to bring in our CEO, Richard Yep. Rich, how are you doing today?
I am good, Dr. Butler. Thank you very much. And I also want to welcome everyone to today's town hall. These have been really fascinating experiences to go through every month with you. And like Dr. Butler said, the fact that we now have the 10 states that have approved the counseling compact means counselors, licensed professional counselors in those states will be able to practice across state lines into states that have joined the compact. So this was a very momentous occasion yesterday when Nebraska signed that into law for us. So anyway, there's a lot going on. ACA is on a very positive trajectory, and I'm just happy to be with all of you. So thanks.
Thank you, Rich. And so today we decided to talk a little bit about our Anti-Racism Commission. We're excited to kind of share what's been going on with them. And we have our leader of that commission, Dr. Tanya Tensley. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She is the owner of Transitions Counseling Services, LLC, and Life Skills Program that includes a ministry division, Love and Basketball Ministries, where she provides individual, marriage, family, and group counseling for consultative services. She is both a licensed professional counselor and a national certified counselor. Dr. Tinsley has also managed to stay alive or active alive. Listen to this. Dr. Tinsley has also managed to stay active in both the workplace and in the community, advocating for and promoting organizations, helping professionals and their clients. Dr. Tinsley served on the board for the Association for Spiritual, Ethical, and Religious Values in Counseling. We know it as a CERVIC, and that was in 2018, 2019, as well as served as AMCD president in 2019 to 2020. She is currently an associate professor at Lincoln University of Pennsylvania in the Counseling and Human Services program and serving as the first chair. That's great to hear because that means it's going to be ongoing. The first chair of the ACA's Anti-Racism Commission. Welcome in, Dr. Tinsley. How you doing?
Thank you, Dr. Kent Butler, and thank you to Rich, Yep, and Brandy McIntyre for having me here today and conversing with you.
It's really good to have you here. It's really exciting that ACA, started looking into, what it meant for Black and brown people, I should say. I don't know what I said. I think I said BRAC just now, but anyway, I don't know why you got me all nervous. All right, so Black and brown people, when George Floyd lost his life and we started delving in deeper, not only were we looking at what ACA was already doing right, but what we can do to probably improve some of the things that are happening within our organization. So from your perspective, what does anti-racism or what does anti-racist mean to you?
Absolutely. And by me talking about what it means for me, I first want to give some kind of some definitions from a couple different books because I want to recommend the books to our audience. One book is Cheryl Holcomb McCoy. She's the editor of Anti-Racist Counseling for students and community, or for schools and communities. I also want to recommend Annalise Singh, Dr. Annalise Singh's Racial Healing workbook. And then also Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. So I'll start with Ibram's book. He talks about anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. To be an anti-racist is a radical choice in the face of history, requiring a radical reorientation of our consciousness. He also goes on to say that being anti-racist is one who is expressing the idea that racial groups are equals and none needs developing, and is supporting policy that reduces inequality. I also like Dr. Cheryl Holcomb McCoy's definition in her book. Being anti-racist refers to taking an active approach to dismantling racist practices and racial hatred, systemic racism, and the oppression of historically oppressed racial groups. So when we talk about anti-racism, we're talking about working to decolonize the policies, dismantle the policies. We want to be able to look at the dominant systems that uphold racist views and ideas, and we want to kind of make sure that these policies, and whether it's systemic and institutional or organizational, also personal, making sure that people are aware and addressing specifically a racist attitude.
Excellent, excellent. So you used the word there that I think also needs some defining, because I think people get afraid of it when they see it, right? And that was the word decolonize. Can you talk a little bit about what decolonize means?
So when we think about the history of the United States, we think about the policies and the procedures and the values and beliefs come from a white male perspective, this colony perspective. And so we are now in a world that is very diverse. And so we still have those policies in our legal system, in our codes of ethics and policies. And so we need to dismantle those policies and bring in an equality and a diverse perspective that represents what our country looks like today, specifically the Black and brown population.
Ooh, excellent. So we just came off of a very successful conference. You had an opportunity at the conference to meet with your commission, to talk with them, and also to be at the conference and see what was happening. What about the conference stands out for you, and what about the conference did you all do as a commission to further your work?
Well, first of all, let me just say what stood out for the conference was just the opportunity for all of us to get together and network and support. We are part of a profession that we support each other, whether we're counselor educators, professional counselors, or what other fields we might work in the helping profession. So we haven't been together since 2019. So that stands out, just being together, connecting with our colleagues. I would also say what stands out are the types of presentations that focused on Black and brown populations. And I saw more than I have seen in past years. So really focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, really focusing on Black men and Black women and trauma, because we are dealing with lots of trauma coming out of the last couple years. And then with the commission, it was really nice for us to get together face to face. We have been on Zoom since we started last July. And so for us to be together face to face was really important, but also to reiterate our work that we are doing. And so those are some of the things that stand out for me.
When you think about anti-racism, can you talk a little bit about how it impacts the counseling relationship? What is it about how a counselor should be working with? And when I say that, I mean, you should not be doing it just because you're working with, but how does someone kind of integrate within themselves? How do they grow in their own leadership and their own counseling ability and skills to kind of manifest a anti-racism identity?
Absolutely. So first, let me go back and just talk about, we have our multicultural counseling competencies, and then that was developed by Sue and Sue, but then we also have the multicultural and social justice competencies. Those really focus on culture. So we could talk about culture.
Let me pull you back really quickly and say Sue, McDavis,
Yes.
and Arredondo.
Yes, thank you.
All right, there you go.
Okay. And so, it really focuses on culture, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. When we're talking about being anti-racist, we're really specifically focusing on race. And so now we're taking the competencies a step further and asking people to be aware of their attitudes and values and beliefs as it relates to race. And one of the things that we find is that when it comes to counselors, people have internalized racist attitudes, ideas, understandings, as Dr. Cheryl Holcomb McCoy states, but also recognizing that those racist attitudes that have been projected to Black and Brown, there's this internalized trauma. There's this concept called race-based traumatic stress. And so when we are as counselors, we need to understand how it impacts Black and Brown people, but we also have to be aware of our conscious and our unconscious beliefs and how that can impact Black and Brown people, whether it's in the relationship in the counseling session, whether it's in the organizational policies, your private practice policies, your agency policies, whether it's in our training, when we talk about university and institutional level, and then when we're talking about our profession as a whole. So what it really means is, I said earlier, dismantling those racist policies that are systemic and addressing them and not stepping around them, not looking at racism like the pink elephant in the middle of the room.
So, we talked a little bit about this before we started today, and hopefully you're not hearing my dog bark in the background there, but this is a very solemn subject to talk about. It's a very discouraging and disheartening, and every single time it comes up, it hits me in different ways, right? And it's never about non-belief anymore. It's like, really, this is really what we're doing still? This is what's happening. So another Black man was killed on April 4th. And it seems to be, again, at the hands of the police. And from what I can tell, it was a white police officer. What message what is the message you would share, I guess, with Black folks or the Black community who are reeling from yet another unarmed man being killed, right? And this one seemed to be definitely looked like it was execution style. And yet we're out here every day, going out there, having dealt with the trauma that came up because of what everybody visualized and saw with the George Floyd piece. And now we have this new one. And it's hard to say new one, right? But it's like every day something's happening to impact people in the Black and Brown community. And so can you talk a little bit about that from an anti-racist perspective? What do you think the commission should be doing with regards to that, with regards to ACA? And what does an organization need to be doing, right? What is it that the organization should be doing so that they can reach out to their members, those people who are hurting, and let them know that they stand with them?
Right. So to answer that question, let me start personally, because when it happened on April 4th, I heard about it. I saw the breaking news. And for me, I said, here we go again. We're still dealing with the same thing. And I did not want to watch the video. But in preparation for today, I watched the video, and it was very triggering for me. Even I'm a human first before I'm a professional counselor, and it's very triggering. So what I would tell messages, members of the Black community, first of all, self-care is really important, because after I watched the video, as I said to you earlier on, I had to go take a little break so I could get myself together for this, because I found myself feeling angry, sad, teary-eyed. So one, people need to own their feelings, but know that you don't have to go through this alone. And so if you need to reach out for support. Two, it's just reminded me we have a lot of work still a lot of work, because as I watched the video, I'm thinking, with everything that's just happened, if we just take the last 2 years and the amount of news and this diversity, equity, inclusion, and this training, has it been just a checkbox for police organizations or for organizations? Or are they really trying to implement these anti-racist perspectives when it comes to Black and Brown people? Because unfortunately, when we're in the car driving while Black, the first thing they see is a Black person. And so there should be some type of training that is enforced when, especially nowadays, knowing what's happened, that police officers should be a little bit more concerned about how they're communicating with the person they're pulling over. I understand safety, but I believe from an anti-racist perspective, we have to do more work with training with the police officers.
So what do you say to individuals who say, you know, that's not everywhere? So that was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Michigan.
Grand Rapids, Michigan.
You know, I'm just saying, they're saying those are isolated incidents. That's really where I'm going with that, right? They say, oh, that happened down in Georgia, and it's not happening in our police force, right? But we're finding that as much as we say that, then we see it pop up in Ohio. We see it pop up in Connecticut, in Arizona, or wherever have you. So we can't just say that it's not happening in our community anymore. So how do we, as helping professionals, work with our law enforcement, work with our communities, work with individuals across the board so that they understand that they have to adopt an anti-racism type of mentality? Because it's not enough to say, oh, that was that one cop and he might not have been this or trained or whatever have you. It's not all of us. But that's not the feeling that people in Black and brown communities have about police officers when they look at them and then they have these triggering types of things that impact them, right?
Right. I think, let me say this too, because when we're talking about, when somebody's saying, oh, this doesn't happen in my community, it happens everywhere. It's two things is it publicized on national TV? Because there was a shooting here in Philadelphia that was not publicized on national TV by a white police officer and a young Black male. So we can't say that it doesn't happen everywhere. But here's the thing. For me as a Black woman and for other Black and brown people, when we hear it, it's here it go again. It's happening again. But for a white person, they don't have to listen to it. They can turn the TV off. And I have heard people that I have been facilitating workshops with that say, you know what? It wasn't until George Floyd that I knew that this was real. Because whenever there was a shooting, I could turn the TV off. So what I'm talking about in terms of our work for anti-racism, people have to be aware. See, some people have a privilege. They don't have to watch this or hear this or listen to it or address it in terms of who they are and their being. But we have to do that. We have to be specific and direct in addressing these race issues that are happening. And we have to address those internalized values and beliefs that people don't realize they have, those unconscious below the surface. I can't remember who said it, but scratch the surface and everybody has some internalized racist beliefs.
And so, like you, I haven't watched the video. I read an article that talked about it. I don't know that I need to see it. Every day, again, I know I'm a Black man. I know that I have to navigate these waters in such a way. And so what would you say to Black males? And, you know, maybe as a Black woman, or what should practitioners and things do to reach out to Black males who are triggered by these types of events?
Well, that's the first thing, reach out. Don't avoid and don't think that Black males don't need support. I was talking to someone and her son is old enough to get his driver's license and he's been avoiding. And when she finally asked, why are you avoiding getting your driver's license? Because I don't want to be a Black male driving. So we need to understand this is impacting people across the lifespan, Black males across the lifespan. And so we need to reach out. We need to check in with our Black males, whether they're friends, family, professionals. Hey, how you doing? I just heard this is going on. Because again, we need to understand the body keeps score. We know trauma is in the body. And so we do need to be intentional and check in and just say, how are you doing with what happened? And
So can somebody who's not connected to that adopt that type of mentality or understanding that there's a need to reach out? You know, I'm wondering, you know, I'm looking at it from an anti-racist space, right? And so if you have someone who doesn't connect that way, right? Doesn't get it, right? And could, like you said, turn the TV off or not listen to the news or not hear it. Blame the victim in some cases, right? How can you get someone who is not oriented towards helping and supporting people who don't look like them or who don't come from their communities to help them see that there is something more to why you need to outreach? And that is not just, oh, get over it. You know, slavery was 400 years ago. You know, that's that mentality that we have to kind of break through. How do we get there?
Well, first, everybody has a philosophy of personal nice and has a philosophy about relationships with other people. So I would say that the first thing is go back and check your philosophy of personal nice. What is your philosophy of interpersonal relationships? Now we also talk about those of us who are in the helping profession and professional counselors. Now go back and ask, why are you in this profession? If you're in this profession to help, who we are professionally does or personally doesn't stop in the door professionally and vice versa. So is what you're doing in the counseling session what you're doing in your personal life?
You know, it's really funny when you said that just now. It's like, I need to help you be like me, right? Not be like who you want to be and who you see yourself to be in the world. I need to help you be like me. Is that what counseling has been?
That's what counseling has been.
Okay.
But we also have to look at, it's not about looking like me. We can have similarities, but there's differences. And are you allowing a Black or brown person that you may have similarities with, allow them to talk about their race and their ethnicity and their microaggressions and their race-based trauma? Or is that an area that's a pink elephant in the middle of the room that you don't address? Because we have dogs, so we talk about dogs. Oh, you shop at this place. Oh yeah, I shop there. Let's get to the root
So there's
of.
the uncomfortableness that comes with having to have real conversations with people who don't look like you or who don't come from your intersectionalities.
And uncomfortableness is not a bad thing. I had a client earlier on, and I love her philosophy. Dr. T, I'm trying to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So being intentional and stretching yourself, being intentional, not stepping out of the box, but expanding the box. And when I think about us as counselors, counselor educators, we can't ask our students and our clients to do something we're not willing to do.
You know, yeah, that's interesting because I've all my life gone into uncomfortable spaces and had to deal with that, right? I had to like physically and emotionally deal with going into spaces that may at times been unwelcoming or that I thought would be unwelcoming to me coming in. And then there are people who are like, you know what, hey, I don't choose to be uncomfortable, so therefore I'm not gonna have to go there. I'm not gonna go there. But people who are coming from Black and brown communities are always entering into spaces where there is this level of you are being watched or you're not belonging and all these other things, which again goes back to what happens for people when they're triggered by police officers shooting unarmed Black men.
Right. And you know, Dr. Butler, I think about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, you and I would talk about and compare our cross-cultural diversity course for our counseling students.
Okay.
And we talk about placing our students in situations where they have to be challenged. And our students wanted to choose safe spaces. And the whole idea was for them to be challenged, right? And when we talk about coming from an anti-racist perspective, you have to be intentional and immerse yourself in these communities, Black and brown communities, to be able to experience and to talk and to develop relationships. But if you're not ready to immerse yourself, then you need to expand your reading. You need to
and when you say immerse, I think you have to immerse as your authentic self.
Yes.
You can't go into these communities playing. You
Yes.
know, you can't be, oh, let me put on this thing and, you know, they'll accept me if I, you know, do the vernacular, or if I do something along those lines. If I dress a certain way, they'll accept me. But what they really will accept is you coming in as your own person.
Right. And if you go to Black and brown communities to do this, they're going to welcome you. And people, I would welcome you because I understand you want to learn.
So there's a misnomer that people in the Black and brown community are mean and don't like people and won't let them in. But that whole church situation where they brought in the young man to be a part of their church service shows you that they're welcoming.
Yes.
hopefully not naive and not welcoming in of individuals, but they're welcoming in people, but people are coming in because of them, letting them be exposed to them and
Right.
doing some things that are very atrocious.
Right. And you know, I'll give an example. So I was taking a class. It was for seminary, but we had to exegete the community. So it's immersing ourselves in communities that we may not be familiar with. So myself and two other pastors from my church, we went, our church community is in the Homewood community of Pittsburgh. We decided to just go walk around so we could meet the people in the community, because we really asked ourselves, how many of us have just gone and walked around? When people first saw us, they were a little hesitant. I dressed up because I like to dress. They thought I was the police or an undercover or something. But it wasn't. Once we started talking to people and they got to know us, those barriers and the attitudes and the hesitancies of connecting with us. But we made the attempt to go in the community. Now, understand, people might have suspicious, because that's the history of our race, is suspicious of outsiders. But don't let that stop you. Find ways to connect. Find an ally or somebody who can go with you. You don't have to do it all alone. We're designed to be in relationship.
The Anti-Racism Commission started off looking at Black and Brown communities to support what is necessary in the counseling profession to work with people who are coming from these identities.
Yes.
It was never to stop there. What do you think the vision of the Anti-Racism Commission is, and where will it be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
Absolutely. First, before I answer that, I think I really want to talk about the stages of group, right? Forming, norming, storming, performing, and then adjourning. And I think
you want to show up as a counselor today. You want to tell us that you really got your degree, right? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. So this first year, we've really just have been forming, norming. We haven't had too much storming. It's just making sure that we understand what our role is and really wanting to get into the action performing. So this commission this year, which was recommendation from the task force that you had led and that you and Sue Pressman had talked about. And so I have some wonderful colleagues, Dr. Monica Ban, Dr. Latasha Hicks-Becton, Dr. Sean Spurgeon, Dr. Sam Steen, Dr. Ahmad Washington, and Dr. Ebony White. And my role as a leader is kind of like, I come from an athletic background, so I'm a coach, and I'm bringing all of these all-stars who are all Americans from high school together on a college team. And right now, I'm trying to learn everyone, understand everyone's strengths, and put it together. So when we were at ACA last week, we said, now we've done some performing, some work this year, but we really want to roll up our sleeves next year, because this first year was really just trying to really understand what we're doing from the task force, how we are working and collaborating with the American Counseling Association. So we want to continue to help propose actions with ACA and breaking down systemic and institutional barriers. We want to be able to provide recommendations. So for example, we've been a part of American Counseling Association's recommendation for their DEI consultant. We want to work with ACA to provide some recommendations to KCREP. We know that some of our divisions and branches are starting anti-racism commissions. We want to be able to support the states, and we want to be able to support the divisions. But we really are going to focus on some action steps moving forward in this second year.
So when you look at that in terms of the mission that you have, you know, what are those steps, right? What do you need to let those who are members of the ACA community know about what's going on? Is there a needs assessment that's going on? How are you reaching out to those individuals so they are made aware of what's happening or what's going on from their perspective? How are they, I guess, providing you feedback?
Absolutely. And that's where we're working collaboratively with ACA. So we started this past fall. So you talk about your dog. My dog is now deciding to play with a bone. So if you hear a bone, that's my dog. I apologize. But it started with Rich sending out an email to the membership to let them know that we formed this anti-racist commission. We are now going to have articles in Counseling Today from each of our commissioners and getting their feedback and their thoughts about anti-racism and what that means in the counseling profession. We are then, as part of our action, we want to have, just like what we're doing now, town halls and getting feedback and working directly with leadership. So, you know, you and I, we received some information from a branch. And so how can we effectively work with the branch to help them achieve their goals of what they're going to do in the state? Looking at the policies and procedures of ACA. So once we get the report back from the DEI consultant, being able to support and continue the recommendations and being able to support the governing council and our profession.
Cool, very cool. So the viewing public has seen a couple of things. There's an article that came out in this past Counseling Today, and you are going to continue to roll out information to folks, and you're going to reach out. Do you have any social media presence?
We don't yet. And so that's part of what we want to talk, that's part of our action steps. So one of the things, and not to get too detail oriented, that Rich and I talked about at ACA is we are going to have one of our past presidents work with us and being clear on our action items and what we're going to do and how that works with ACA's action items and the recommendations that have come from the task force. So I think what I want people to understand is that we're trying to be in the performing stage while we're also forming and norming. So we're looking at the second year, having more presence, getting more people involved now that we have laid the framework and the foundation and planted the seed.
So we have a few minutes. We're going to start opening it up to our members in the audience there. But I want to ask you, what's your pride point? Do you have any pride points yet with regards to, you know, where you are with the commission?
You know, when I was at University of Iowa and working in athletics, Vivian Stringer was the coach at that time, and she brought the best recruiting class in the country. And that year that I was working with the women's basketball team. And one of the things she told the players is, your skills and your background have gotten here. Now we got to learn how to play together. So we're going to break you down and build you up. One of my pride points is being this coach, bringing these All-Americans that are on our commission together, learning everybody's skills, expertise, and merging them and putting them together so we can win a championship.
That's why you're the coach. Winning championships, you know, winning people over. I mean, I think about it, you know, when you bring that analogy up, I think about women's basketball at UConn and how it started off slow, right? The rebuilding that you talked about. Right. And then it built in momentum. They won a championship, right? That's one, right? But we want more than one championship with anti-racism. We want multiple championships from multiple people. We want to expand the team as far as possible. Yeah. And that continues to make it so that when you had 4 people in the audience, now you had 100 people in the audience, and now you're filling out stadiums. Right. And ACA wants to fill out stadiums when it comes to anti-racism.
Absolutely. And, you know, we as counselors, we've heard this statement, trust the process. And yeah. I think people have to trust the process because we are rebuilding. We can't ask for changes in 1 year of things that have been going on since 1619. And we are starting to, you know, lay the foundation to be action oriented. Change is a process, change takes time, and we are using the theory of change to be able to rebuild our team.
There's something blackety black about your t-shirt, and I just want to ask you, what's your t-shirt say?
Black mental health matters. And I thought it was timely because we know that coming out of this pandemic, or with the pandemic, it really impacted Black and brown people. And we already knew before the pandemic that there were barriers to Black and brown people and their help-seeking behavior. And I will tell you, when everything happened with Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I had a number of Black clients reach out to me and say, I prefer to work with a Black counselor, a Black therapist. We right now have to make sure that we are preparing anti-racist professionals and counselors, because does there have to be a perfect match? No, but there has to be this understanding of an anti-racist attitude and values that come out to be able to support. Because right now, until we get more Black and brown counselors, we are going to need a host of anti-racist counselors.
So it's about connection. And I think what I think people can take away from that is, think about how comfortable you are without even thinking about it, going to see the counselors that you go to see. Mm-hmm. And why wouldn't that be important for somebody who's Asian, for somebody who's Hispanic, for somebody who's African-American, or from any African descent? Mm-hmm. There is a need for people to be able to do that. We were taught, oh, you don't have to worry about that. You just have to be a blank slate and let people come in. Right. But you have to look at the totality of it, the full picture, the whole being, and allow those people to be themselves in that space. Yeah.
And I know we have to open it up for questions and answers, but here's kind of my visual way of driving home what you just said. If everybody has a pen, I want you to just write your name. Just write your first name, your last name on a piece of paper. And then I want you to write your first name and last name with your opposite hand. What was it like for you to do it with your dominant hand?
If you don't have a pen, type it in with your right hand on your chat. Write it in the chat in your right hand, and then write it with your left hand in your chat.
Right. And what happens is, when we write with our dominant hand, it's natural, it's unconscious, right? Yep. But when we write with our opposite hand, we have to be intentional, we have to be focused. And what happens is, wow, I ask you to write with your opposite hand for the next week. You could say, I can do it. But when you're in a hurry, when you're not focused, you're going to go back to what you know. And that is the same thing with an anti-racist and a racist perspective. You can say that I'm going to change and be different with my opposite hand, but when you're in a hurry, when something happens, you're going to go back to what you know.
You're going to drop the whole word right there. You know, that's why you're a minister too, right? It's like, okay. It's dropping the knowledge. All right, so we want to open it up to everyone. Please, those of you who are hanging out with us, please drop conversation into the chat, or you can come on board with us and, you know, unmute yourself and your mic, put your pictures on, let us see you, your video, who's out there in the audience with us today. But we want to open it up. We can start a queue by saying, hey, I got something I want to say, by putting it in the chat, or you can just write your question in the chat, and we are here for you. Dr. Tanya Tinsley.
And it can be a question, comment, or concern.
Or concern. This is what it's all about. So who do we have out there?
Let me see if I have any of my former students. They know I'll call on them directly.
I know that we got some people out there who won't be silent. Come on now. What's happening?
You know, I want to say, I see Dr. Michael DeAndrea on, and I want to say something. What I appreciate in Dr. Cheryl Holcomb McCoy's book, that she stated, and I want you all to know this, because Dr. DeAndrea talked about us having to be anti-racist years ago, right? And so I think this is not something new. But if it keeps coming up, we need to make sure we roll up our sleeves and work. And so maybe I'll just ask Dr. DeAndrea if you have any comments or about what you were trying to do years ago. Maybe, maybe not.
Oh,
No,
he was looking
I
at
was
muting,
shuffling.
unmuting.
I
Mike.
was using my non-dominant hand to get that icon. And I was uncomfortable that I couldn't do it so quickly.
Whoa.
I have a few comments, yeah. First, I want to thank Tanya and Kent for the leadership that they've demonstrated throughout the years. And this is a real important stage in our ongoing movement. I think what we need to look at is systemic change and individual change and how they can be wedded together. As some of you know, I worked with Judy Lewis and Mike Lewis and Judy Daniels to promote the community counseling model that looks at direct and indirect services. And I think that might be one roadmap that we can look at as we begin to formulate an increased understanding of the multidimensional ways that we can concretely work on systemic change. I think two things are real important to look at. About 75 million people voted for Donald Trump in the last election. Donald Trump represents a racist consciousness that is attractive to millions of white people in the United States. Some people say that we take 2 steps forward in our struggle for civil rights and human rights and 1 step back. Clearly, during the Trump era, we took 1 step forward and 2 steps backward going on here. So the issue of religious and spiritual competencies was really not welcomed 20 years ago in ACA. Why? Because it was personal. And we didn't want to impose or get on. But thank goodness we were able to develop. And I know that both of you, and Tanya in particular with your spiritual background, have helped us unfold competencies. There was a time when addressing gay, lesbian, transsexual, and bisexual persons was not in the van. As a matter of fact, right until 1973, it was in the DSM as homosexuality being a mental health disease going on. But we've moved beyond that. If we look at what's going on in this country, there's 2 things I think we need to keep in mind. One, we're approaching a time of the most serious and unprecedented phenomena related to race is occurring. And that is, as we all know, up until this point in time, the United States had been comprised of a majority of people from white, Western European, English-speaking, and predominantly Christian backgrounds. And within 8 to 10 years, based upon the demographic researchers, right, for the first time, this country is going to be comprised of a majority of people who are non-white, non-Western European, non-English speaking, and increasingly non-Christian. I think that is really important for us to look at the connection between that phenomena that is freaking white people out. It's causing a lot of anxiety with white people, and anxiety leads to anger going on. I don't think that's being trumped up enough, looking at the intimate interconnection between the transformation and what's going on with the rise of racism. We're not going backwards. We're going forwards as still a predominantly white nation to kind of look at the whole issue of critical race theory. And where else would issues of race, Tanya, that you laid out today in terms of what this group is doing in ACA, than in the schools? What can we do every time we go to a city? I'd like to see 3 things happen. One is that we meet with the board of directors, the education leaders in that city, and talk about how they are incorporating, and then share an outline map of things that they might consider having teachers do in the classrooms. Your idea about the competencies is real important. Number 2, I'd like to see us organize and strongly urge members to have a cutout time where we have town hall meetings in each city that we're at that is entitled something that we have already done for 8 years, and it's called Continuing the National Discussion on Race, Justice, and Peace. And we have a format to follow that's been successful, where we went to 11 cities and worked with over 3,000 people to kind of implement this strategy going on. Number one, we want to have time to have these town hall meetings and have Richard Yep and presidents in ACA say, hey, this is a time that we would really like isolate a 2-hour period to go to a church or to go to a school or to go to a university, not have the people come to us, but to go to continue the national discussion that's going on. And number two, I think looking at strategies like the community counseling model would be good. Number three, we have to openly be proud to follow the tradition of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King to become more political. We need to have a division in ACA that looks at political counseling and political psychology. We need to kind of embrace what's going on in terms of the political world, because it's going really fast backward. And the fourth thing is, can we please set up 5 stations in the communities we go to for voter registration? If we roll back in these midterms where you have a majority of Republicans elected into office, all that Trump has done is going to be reinforced in terms of attacking from a racist ideology what's going on. Number one, community counseling. Number two, having town hall meetings. Number three, having voter registration in locations that we can go to. And I love your thing, Tanya, where you talk about we want to get out and talk to people and do that. We can do that. Number three, can we begin a discussion about having a political counseling and liberation association that complements the work of AMCD, that complements the counselors for social justice, and our thing. But lastly, I just want to thank the two of you. This is so important what you're doing today. I hope my 4 suggestions are something that you'll think about and possibly move to implementing.
Thank you, Dr. DeAndrea. Thank you very, very much. And I have to laugh and say to you really quickly, and this is a personal thing. My sister came up to me at the conference and said, hey, I know somebody who knows somebody who knows you. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. And she said, you know Michael DeAndrea? I said, yes. Well, I know his brother, Barry.
My brother called me this weekend and said, hey, I got to tell you about someone who's talking about you in very positive terms. And he said it was Ken Butler, the president of ACA. And I thought, oh, I really appreciate that. Now there's the connection right there. Really good.
Connection.
Thank
so
you.
listen, we have a hand up, and I want to get to that person. Is Claire Francie Promer Sowers. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon.
So I did put in the chat as a PhD student who's transitioning to another program, and as a minister of the gospel, I find as a counselor that a lot of times people, especially in the African-American community, really don't want to talk about their mental health. How do we overcome that stigma? That's one of my my projects as far as in counseling. And another thing was, how do we help our, brothers and sisters who don't look like us have those create those spaces so they can be vulnerable and give them the language in order to communicate, some of the pain that they're feeling. Because a lot of them, I know, I'm in an interracial relationship. My husband's a Caucasian, and how do we help them to have that language to talk about some of the things that's going on? For him, we live in the Washington, D.C. area, and it pained him to see what was happening with George Floyd. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, so I know what's going on in Grand Rapids. I grew up, I'm old enough to remember the riots of '68. And what came out of that on the Warren Commission. But how do we as counselors, even the church, help bridge those conversations, because they need to be had? And we just don't talk about Trump. I can recall Webb, who was a senator from Virginia. He wanted to run for president in 2016 because he felt like when Obama was elected, a lot of white people got left off. So it's not just on that one side of the aisle, it's felt on both sides of the aisle. And so now we had someone who was in office that emboldened people to have that conversation. So, what can we do as mental health counselors to help those bridges?
I think this is a great question. And I guess I'm going to say a few things. Dr. DeAndrea, Michael, I appreciate everything that you said, and I appreciate your friendship, your support professionally. So one of the things we just talked about is going out and immersing in the community, but we got to do that with each other. And we can't be afraid to have the conversations with each other. So if you're not comfortable going out, start getting involved in professional organizations, networking. I contacted Dr. DeAndrea because I was doing work at a university and I really wanted to use the multicultural awareness, knowledge, and skills for faculty members. So reach out to your colleagues and begin those conversations, and do not be afraid. As when I was a president of the Pennsylvania Counseling Association, it was important to have these questions and these conversations at the table. Bring the conversations, even if people are not ready, and don't give up. And my keynote speaker for that year was Dr. Cheryl Holcomb McCoy. And so bringing in people that can support you in these conversations. Scheduling town hall meetings with different entities. So as Kent said, and as Michael said, I do a lot of work with faith-based organizations. I bring pastors together. I bring faith-based leaders and having conversations to bridge the gap between faith and mental health. And I will also say that we have to make sure that we train our faculty and counselor educators to do this. See, one of my wishes that this was part of the task force, and Dr. Richi Alatunji West, is how, just like we have an ethics requirement to renew our license, maybe we need to have some type of anti-racist, multicultural requirement, because right now there are people who are teaching counseling courses that don't have the training in anti-racism. And so we're asking us to be anti-racist, but we have faculty that are not integrating in that in the classroom. So that might be where there's some requirements for tenure, for your renewal of license. And so we need to make sure that those that are training our counselors are coming from an anti-racist perspective.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you. There was a question that was in the chat from Terrence Martin. So let me just read it really quickly. Regarding the amount of Black and Brown providers, therapists available for communities of color or lack thereof, is there an initiative by this commission that is focused on addressing this specific issue? If so, what is it? And how can professionals in mental health or civic allies get involved in these efforts?
Great question, Terrence. And I can tell you, Dr. Ebony White and I were just talking about this 2 weeks ago. Both of us are licensed in New Jersey, and she's completely booked. I'm completely booked. And we both have been trying to find, Dr. Sharita Hughes is completely booked, another Black therapist counselor. And so we need to have some type of list to know who's available, who's licensed in each of these states. We are working with ACA, Brandy, and Rich, because right now, not all of us check the box when we become members at ACA that we're Black. So we can't even go look at our membership to pull out those Black and Brown therapists. So we have to have a better way of identifying. So you asked a great question. Because Dr. Ebony White and I have talked about this, this is something that we do want to bring up, because right now we make up 10 to 13%. And we have to be prepared, again, to know who's out there and book. I talked to somebody who's a licensed clinical social worker, because all of the professional counselors were booked and she's booked. And I could tell from her email how overwhelmed she is. And so we do need to make sure our professional counselors all of our professional counselors are coming from an anti-racist, because it's putting a lot of pressure on us Black and Brown professionals. We're adding more clientele when we should be taking a break. And we want to help, because we know that there are stigmas and barriers to Black and Brown people seeking help. So if somebody calls me, I'm like, okay, let me find a way to see if I can fit them in, or let me see if I can find somebody, and everybody's completely broke. So this is a topic area that we need to address, and we need to have a plan. So I will make sure, Terrence, that this is brought up at our next commission meeting as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it also goes into what you said. You have to get out into the communities. One of the things that I think that we have not been doing as Black and Brown counselors is going into our own community and helping them see us, right? And understand who it is. We've been relying on oh, the church will send us people, or this person will send, or this counselor, the school counselor will send people. But we need to start building that. The Black Male Initiative that I have with the task force is looking at how do we bring people in so that they see counseling as an opportunity. So I want to thank you, Dr. Tinsley, for being here today. Thank you, Dr. DeAndrea, for chiming in as well. We are moving to the next phase. Dr. Tinsley is going to stay on, I believe, and have more opportunity to talk with people from the lens of anti-racism. And I want people to recognize that anti-racism is really about inclusion. We're trying to show up with everyone. This is not about excluding anyone, but it's letting people understand why we are having these conversations and have been having these conversations for years, right? Dr. DeAndrea will tell you that these types of conversations started way back when we were looking at creating ANWIC, which became AMCD,
Right.
how we can be included and how we can start to see each other for who we are and what we bring to the table. So thank you both for being here today and sharing your words of wisdom. We're going to turn it over right now to Brandy, who is going to tell us how we're going to get into our breakout rooms.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Butler. And thank you again, Dr. Tinsley, for being here today. That was so great. I just want to remind everyone to also let your colleagues know that the recording of this town hall will be up on YouTube in a couple of days, and our past recordings are there too. So if there's anything that you missed, you can go back and view it in a few days. So as Dr. Butler mentioned, we are going to open up breakout rooms for folks to network for some time. We have, I believe, 6 rooms. One is Chat with Dr. Butler. We'll have a topic-focused room, which is where Dr. Tinsley will be. We have a room for students, school counselors, practitioners, and counselor educators. So feel free to join whichever room resonates with you. And if you need help getting into a room, just open your mic and let me know, and I can put you where you want to go.
Brandy, I just want to make sure I'm going to today's topic, correct?
That's right, Dr. Tinsley.
Okay, got it.
Thank you all for being with us today, and we'll see you either in a room or we'll talk with you moving forward as we continue to do this great work.
Thank you. And Michael DeAndrea, I'm going to reach out to you. I'm so glad to see you, and thank you for all of your comments.
Hey, thanks a lot. I'm kind of basing on this, Brandy. Can you help me?
Of course. Which room would you like to go to?
Could you repeat what what